Well, and I'm glad that you brought up, those topics about bowl games because I thought about it. This actually was a thought I had last week going into, talking about the different teams that were still, involved. Potentially could be picked in the college football playoff, and thinking about the postseason, and it was a thought that I had, and it's going to be the subject of our first hot or cold question. Of course, if you guys are not familiar with the Crash Course podcast, we have a segment every once in a while called Hot or Cold, where we say a take and tell you whether or not it's a hot take or a cold take. And this may not be, it's our Crash Course Bowl special. We do it every year, and this may not be the way to start off our bowl special. But the hot or cold take is this: does bowl season actually suck? Because I honestly think it's a hot take. Maybe saying it sucks is a little harsh, but I think it's definitely overrated because I'm right there with you, B. Scott. Growing up, bowl season was something I looked forward to every year. That ad with Capital One where they had the different where they had the kind of the Christmassy music. With the different teams that were going to play, in that given next couple of days, and they were, getting you hyped up for those games. It was really exciting. But now it's just not the same, and I think it's something where, like, as I've gotten older, because we're told, at least when I was growing up, always heard about, and we still hear about, the sanctity of the regular season in college football. College football has one of, if not the most important regular season in all of sports, and it's paired with some of the most electric atmospheres all across the country. I mean, from week to week, you have games that mean so much played in front of stadiums that are just rocking. I mean, hundreds of thousands of fans packed into, places like the Big House and Neyland Stadium and Alabama and just all these great venues. And then, once conference championship weekend ends, we transition to like half-empty stadiums between, being played between teams that are 6-6, the games that don't really mean anything.
This year we have 5 and 7 teams that are playing.
Right, exactly. We have there are 43 bowl games this year, 16 of which feature teams that are 6-6 or worse. That's 37%. So nearly 40% of all the bowl games are played with teams that are 6-6 or worse. 6 of those bowl games feature teams that are both 6-6. So teams that are both, one team will finish below 500, one team will just be one above 500. And look, we're not breaking any news here by saying that there's way too many bowl games played with way too many meh teams. But I don't know. It's just, it's just a dud way to end what is a fantastic regular season. And so, and as I've gotten older, you just kind of, I think, recognize that a little bit more, like, hey, this kind of, doesn't mean the same. Now, I will say this, there are certain games I get up for, like I like watching the MAC, being someone who grew up in MAC country. I do enjoy, I'll go watch.
And those players don't opt out. They don't opt out.
Exactly. I'll watch. Sometimes they do. I'll watch those games. I am a sucker for games that are between two teams that are like aesthetically pleasing as far as like their uniforms. If you've got like a nice clash of uniforms that looks nice, I'm good for that. But other than that, yeah, I mean, you get some games that are just kind of, meh most of the time. But I do think you brought up the college football playoff. I do think that the expanded playoff will help that as well, because even though you'll still, because we're not going to get any like less bowls. Like there's not going to be less bowl games, because that's always kind of the like that's the obvious answer. It's like, let's just have less bowl games. Then that getting to a bowl game would mean more. You could maybe make it to where, I don't know how you would enforce this, or even if this would make any sense, but maybe make something to where like you can't, like kind of like, because everybody talks about the transfer portal being free agency anyway, make it to where you can't transfer until after, because at least that would cut down on the transfer portal. You can't prevent people from opting out as far as like going to the draft, like the draft eligible players, but like maybe as far as the transfer portal, you could say, hey, you can't transfer until your team's season is over. You can't until your team season is over. You can't transfer, and maybe put now because of course I'm a big proponent too of like the coaches. Like if the coaches are allowed to do it, the players should be allowed to do it too. That's why I always thought it was so silly that like the players can't transfer, but a coach can talk a player into going somewhere and spending their 4 years of their life there. But a coach after 1 year can be like, actually deuces, I'm going to go across the country again. Like so maybe make that same thing like for coaches as well. Like a coach has to finish out. Like start putting clauses where coaches have to finish out their season with that team, because you see that a lot with coaches too. Like Oregon, like even the game we're going to talk about, Oregon State won't have two quarterbacks and won't have their head coach for this bowl game. That's an Oregon State team that I think if we were going to see Oregon State and Notre Dame at full force, it would be a great game. But because of all the other stuff floating around. So, yeah, that even takes away, as you were saying, takes away from the bowl games that actually aren't meh, are the transfer portal stuff. So, but back to my point about the college football playoff, I think because you will have more meaningful games surrounding the dud games, I think that will kind of be good palate cleansers. Like, hey, there's playoff football this week, but until then, at least we have these games to tide us over, because we're 3-4 weeks away from meaningful football, so it's kind of easier to ignore the games that don't matter. Those games still won't matter next year, but at least okay, we're gonna gear up for the first round matchup between Florida State and Missouri next year. But until then, at least we've got this matchup between Georgia Southern and Eastern Michigan to tide us over until then. So maybe that'll help a little bit. I don't know for sure, but at least it'll help a little.
No, it won't. It is definitely a hot take. I don't think bowl season matters because, like you said, the biggest issue is there's just too many. They've added so many that they don't even have enough bowl eligible teams. I mean, there was at least 1 year during our time at Ball State that Ball State was bowl eligible and was left on the outside looking in because there wasn't enough bowls. And, back then, but you didn't have the opt-outs of all of these games. I mean, if you may have had one or two opt-outs, you may have had a guy that, hey, I'm projected to be the number 1 overall pick. My team's not playing in a New Year's Six bowl or playing for a national championship. I'm not going to risk it to play in one meaningless game. So it was very rare to see it. But now it's just like you have entire rosters that are either are in the transfer portal or are opting out. I mean, for goodness sakes, this Ohio State versus Missouri game had a really strong possibility of being a good game. But I don't know who's going to play quarterback for Ohio State. Devin Brown and Kyle McCord are in the transfer portal. I haven't heard for certain. Oh, and like a lot of other players are. I haven't heard for certain, but I'm pretty sure Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to opt out of that one because, well, he's going to have nobody to throw it to him anyways. So it's like eventually we're going to get to a point where there's going to be so many opt-outs that teams can't truly field a competitive squad. And it's like, I mean, the only good thing for teams with these opt-outs is in bowl games is the fact that they get extra practices, and they're essentially going to be practicing with the players that are going to be back next year. So it's like it's a good time for them to see what they've got going into the next year, I guess. Otherwise, why am I, as a fan, why am I going to spend my money to travel somewhere and to watch basically, I mean, yeah, it's the future of your team potentially, but why? When I know it's like, man, my team's going to get completely smacked around because we have our walk-on true freshman quarterback who has run scout team all year who's going to be the starting quarterback in this game. It's not what you want to see. I'm not going to pay that kind of money. I mean, unless you're like a fan of Boston College and Boston College is playing in the Fenway Bowl, well, yeah, you're just having to go down the street. So, okay, right. I'll do that. But
And you're seeing that happen a lot, kind of as a band-aid. You see teams, I mean, that's happened even when that's happened for a long time. I mean, I remember, heck, I went to the Beef O'Brady's Bowl. That was UCF playing Ball State, that UCF playing in Tampa. So, I mean, you see teams that play, Rutgers played Ball State in the International Bowl. I know that's New Jersey to Toronto, but that's not too far. I mean, I guess, so.
Muncie to Toronto's not that far either.
I mean, yeah, theoretically. But, like, you see that a lot where they will put a team in to at least one of the teams in a bowl that's basically a home game for that team.
Well, Purdue playing Tennessee in the Music City Bowl.
Yeah, because I remember you talking about how I didn't even think about it until you had said that. I mean, I knew it in the back of my head, but didn't think about it until you said it. How Tennessee's technically playing a home game in a smaller stadium than their home stadium, because Neyland Stadium is bigger than Nissan Stadium, so. Which is pretty wild to think about it when you look at it that way. But yeah, I mean, and you wonder, because of all the NIL stuff as well. If because the talent gap at the top of these conferences is going to become so much bigger than the bottom of these conferences. If you're going to see more 5 and 7 teams, 4 and 8 teams, if that's not going to create, of course, like you said, less bowl eligible teams. You're going to have trouble filling all these bowl games. What's going to happen with, what are we going to see happen with these bowl games? Are they going to get integrated into the playoff? Are we going to see them, like, how are we going to start seeing maybe once the playoff expands to 12 teams, we're going to see a 12-team, like, kind of NIT type thing where maybe that entices players to actually stick around, and those bowl games are tied into that NIT. What are we going to see moving forward? Because, yeah, these games are all meaningless, and the more you see, the richer these teams get at the top, and all these, and the more opt-outs and transfers you see, but, kind of diluting the product, the worse it's just going to get.
You know what? Here's how you solve this problem once and for all. These bowls are tied to major sponsors. Cheez-It, Pop-Tarts, whatever it might be, Tax Slayer, all of these major corporations that are getting big advertising money and having their name flashed out there, while with the help of these players, have a cash payout for the winner.
Yeah.
Similar to this in-season tournament in the NBA. The winning team gets X amount of dollars to spread across their team for NIL purposes, because you wore a patch on your jersey that said Cheez-Its. So now Nabisco will pay you.
Yeah.
Your team wins. All right, here's a check, and you distribute it amongst your players as seed fit. The losing team, here's your lesser check, and you distribute it amongst your players.
Yeah.
Technically it's an NIL deal.
Yeah. And
they've helped promote the Cheez-Its brand. They've helped promote the Pop-Tarts brand or the Duke's Mayo brand. And if that starts happening, you're going to start seeing these small podunk bowls start to go away a little bit as well, because they can't keep up. They can't pay that kind of money. So, which is fine, because then it doesn't dilute the pool.
Or not necessarily go away, but you're going to see bigger sponsors taking those over.
Right. And then I think you're going to see, you're going to see fewer opt-outs. You're still going to see opt-outs for guys that are like, okay, it looks like I'm going to be a first-round draft pick. I really don't want to risk my future for a $25,000 check. When I'm going to be looking at millions next year. So that makes sense. And you're also still, people aren't talking about, but you are still seeing a lot of schools that help their players take insurance out on their futures. So that should be something more talked about as well. But I think what it's going to help is you're not going to see these players jump in the portal the minute their regular season ends, because they're like,
I'm losing money by not
for one more game. I will announce my intentions that I'm going to enter the portal after my season has concluded. Also, I think you're right. The NCAA needs to push the portal dates differently. However, it does. I understand the portal dates now because it lines up with the academic calendar. And if a player enters the portal, which just opened up on Monday the 4th, and it closes January 2nd, that allows the player then to transfer to another school and enroll in time for the next semester.
But here's the thing, is that and I know that this opens up a whole other can of worms that I don't know if we necessarily want to get into now. We can maybe do this on a podcast on its own, I'm sure, but that's also assuming these transfers are happening for academic reasons, which they're not. They're happening for football reasons.
They are happening for football reasons, but if you,
I know you have to still do the school part of it. I understand that.
Well, no, in order for them to be eligible to be a part of X school's team, they have to be enrolled at the school in order to be able to participate in spring practice. That's why it is. They need to be able to.
Could they not change the eligibility rules on that? Could they not be like if you're transferring from a school that's in a bowl game, we will give you an exclusion? Does that solve that?
Or what you do is what you change is that, hey, you leave it up to the school.
Yeah.
Like, let's say, for instance, but you can go in the portal, you can commit to another school, but it is up to your current coach if they will allow you to play in the bowl game. That's what I think it should be. Not it should be automatic. Look, this player's in the portal and is committed,
but
for somebody else.
But I think, though, like, for instance, like, so Kyle McCord, right? He's the first name I think of going into the portal. He probably doesn't, like, whoever he goes to, let's say, just for the sake of it, let's say he wants to go play for Michigan next year. Like, I'm sure Jim Harbaugh doesn't want him playing for Ohio State and potentially getting, like, tearing his Achilles in the bowl game and being unavailable next year. Like, you kind of get into a weird situation where, like, okay, the coach allows him to potentially get, not saying that he would be allowing him to play for nefarious reasons, hoping he would get hurt. That's not what I'm saying. But, like, it's a weird kind of, like, we know he's on his way out, so we're okay playing him, because we don't necessarily care what happens. I mean, obviously they care, but you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a weird dynamic where we know he's on his way out, so but we're hoping he's healthy for a different team. Like, it's a weird kind of dynamic in that regard.
They will never change the eligibility requirements just because, like, well, it's like, they're transferring for football reasons, not academic. Well, of course they're transferring for football reasons and not academic. But because changing up eligibility requirements for football players and not for every other student is tough. Like, that's why there's portal windows. There's a portal window that opens up at the end of the regular season and closes right before the next semester begins. And then there's another portal that opens up at the end of the spring and closes at the beginning of the summer that allows players that are come through spring practice and go, okay, look, I'm not going to be getting PT next year. I'm going to transfer. So now I have time to finish up my degree here, get my diploma and go on to another school, or I have time to enroll at the other school so I can either get there in the summer or I can get there in the fall. Because there's a ton of paperwork. Trust me, I am a college transfer. There is a lot that goes into it from transferring from one school to another. It's not just I'm going to pack up my stuff and start signing my checks over to this different school. And there's a lot that has to happen. And you don't just pick, you still have to get accepted.
Yeah, that's true.
Into the other school, and their admissions offices work on certain schedules as well. So, I mean, yes, student athletes have a little bit, their admissions process for them is a little bit different. Because you can't tell me that everybody that goes to Northwestern is perfectly eligible to go to Northwestern or Vanderbilt or even Michigan. So but that's a different story. But it is a time consuming process and a lot of paperwork that has to go through to get transferred from one school to another.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. We spent too much time on it already. We need to move on. But where I was going with it was, we've talked about it before. I think with transferring, where because before I understood transferring because your coach left. That's a good reason. We've talked about you need to transfer
to
grad school, transferring during your doing whatever. There should be something where you should have to designate a reason. Instead of just oh, I'm leaving because I don't like the situation I'm in currently football wise. That's what
Here's the reason. I'm leaving to find a bigger bag.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much
that's it.
Yeah, exactly.